I'm not at home on crowded streets. They don't appeal to me. In the heart of God's cathedral is where I want to be. So I take the outside circle when the stars are growing dim. See the morning light play shadows all along the canyon rim. I feel the prairie wake and flush a dozen bobwhite quail as I guide my favorite cow horse down a rough and rocky trail. I ride through mountain country, gaze across the great divide as I trail majestic mustangs that no man will ever ride. A red-tailed hawk is screaming as he searches for his prey. The cottonwoods are yellow on this crisp November day. I crave the open spaces where the sky is blue and wide. Somewhere west of Wall Street is where my heart and soul reside. Thanks for riding along with us as we explore another trail somewhere west of Wall Street. Today we're in Cleburne, Texas, and we're in a place they call the Chisholm Trail Museum. We're going to talk about the Chisholm Trail, but I'd like for you folks to come down to Cleburne and see this unbelievable museum. Stay with us, we'll be right back, because we're going to talk about the most famous cattle trail of them all.
Somewhere West of Wall Street is brought to you by our friends at the National Ranching Heritage Center, located on the campus of Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas. By Railhead Realty for homes and ranches in North Texas. By the American Quarter Horse Association, registering America's favorite horse for over 75 years. By American Hats, proud to be an American, proud to wear an American hat. By Jerry's Auto Group, located in Weatherford, Texas for over 50 years. By Caesar Clayburgh Wildlife Research Institute, conserving wild things and wild places. And by the King Ranch Saddle Shop, with retail stores in Fort Worth, Kingsville, Houston, and College Station. Or visit us at krsaddleshop.com. The National Ranching Heritage Center on the campus of Texas Tech University tells the story of ranching in the American West. Those stories began in countless cabins and dugouts and evolved to cattle-bearing mansions like the Barton House. Originally built as a centerpiece of a ranching and farming community in West Texas, it now stands as a tribute to another era at the National Ranching Heritage Center. As a viewer of my show, I know you believe in preserving our wonderful ranching heritage, and I would like to personally invite you to come to the one place in the world where you can walk through the history of ranching from the Spanish land grants to modern times. You can also help preserve our history by joining me as a member of the Ranching Heritage Association by visiting ranchingheritage.org. Come experience real ranching, real stories, real heritage at the National Ranching Heritage Center in Lubbock, Texas.
America's favorite easy on, easy off energy compression socks just got better. Introducing CopperFit Energy Plus, the world's first graduated compression socks with a rich blend of ingredients found in the top moisturizing lotions and creams. These microencapsulated ingredients are infused into the compression fabric and are gradually released and absorbed by your movement. Motion-activated technology designed to hydrate and soften for all-day comfort. The more you move, the more CopperFit Energy socks delivers.
I'm not thinking about that I have compression socks on. That simple fact that they feel better with them on than with them off makes me love these socks.
Our most advanced copper-infused compression fabric, made in FDA-approved manufacturing facilities, woven into our Easy On, Easy Off graduated compression sock to help reduce swelling and discomfort from prolonged sitting or standing.
I feel that soothingness in my calves and in my ankles, but they can make my feet feel good after 300 miles on the road, and they got to be good for anybody else.
Enhanced compression around the arch and ankles for extra support and relief of muscle aches and pains. And a soft, shock-absorbing footbed for all-day comfort.
All that arch pain that I typically have is just relieved.
They are super comfortable.
They do the job. They're easy and they're effective. That's the whole point of wearing them.
Commercials always promise, promise, promise. This was something easy to try. Just put on a sock, see if it works. I have to say that I'm a fan.
The first ever Easy On, Easy Off compression socks with hydrating ingredients, worn by thousands of essential workers across the U.S. Order your Energy Plus compression socks online now at GetEnergyPlus.com for only $19.99 or call 1-800-597-7290. Order right now and get a second pair free.
I get compression, I get comfort, all in one sock.
Motorcycle guys appreciate the better technology. This is better technology.
Feel the power of CopperFit.
There were several trails that cattle followed from the South Texas brush to the railheads in Kansas through Texas. The most famous, though, was the Chisholm Trail. It's the one we talk about the most. Jesse Chisholm was born in about 1805 in Tennessee. He was the oldest son of a Scottish immigrant and a Cherokee woman. Jesse's parents split up, and in about 1820 he moved with his mother to Indian Territory during a period when some Cherokee migrated there voluntarily from the southeast, and he was raised in Cherokee culture. He was living in the Cherokee Nation near Fort Gibson, and as he grew up he became a trader, a hunter, a guide, and a scout. In 1826, while working for a gold-seeking party, he blazed a trail up the Arkansas River to the site of present-day Wichita, Kansas. And in 1830, he helped blaze a trail from Fort Gibson to Fort Towson, which was near the Red River. And in 1834, he took part in the Dodge-Leavenworth expedition, which made the first official contact with the Comanche, Kiowa, and Wichita near the Wichita Mountains in southwestern Oklahoma. In 1836, Jesse married Eliza Edwards, the daughter of James Edwards, who ran a trading post in what is now Hughes County, Oklahoma. And working with his father-in-law, Jesse took trade goods west and south into Plains Indian country, learned a dozen or so languages, established a small trading post, and was soon in demand as a guide and interpreter. Eventually, he interpreted at treaty councils in Texas, Indian Territory, and Kansas. In 1865, Jesse loaded a train of wagons at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas and headed south, establishing a trading post at Council Grove on the North Canadian, near the site of present-day Oklahoma City. Frequent trips up and down that trail left it relatively well marked and easy to follow. In 1867, O.W. Wheeler bought 2,400 steers in South Texas near San Antonio and was trailing them to the markets in Kansas when, shortly after crossing the North Canadian River in Indian Territory, he discovered a well-used wagon trail. Wheeler with his herd followed those wagon ruts all the way into Kansas, and the trail for which Jesse Chisholm became famous was born. Jesse never drove cattle up the trail that bore his name. He died of food poisoning on March 4, 1868 at his trading camp at Left Hand Spring near Gary, Oklahoma. In 1865, after 4 long years of civil war, many of the Texas boys who finally made it home found little to come home to. Often they discovered that their farms and ranches had been abandoned, their fields were unplowed, and their cattle were roaming wild. As a matter of fact, there were lots of cattle roaming wild, and most were unbranded. These cattle were all Longhorns, and they were all descendants of about 200 head of longhorned cattle that in 1690 were driven north out of Mexico into what became known as Texas to a mission on the Sabine River. In 1693, fearing an attack by Indians, the mission was abandoned and the missionaries fled back to Mexico. By the time of the Civil War, nearly 300 years after the cattle first set foot in America, millions of longhorns ranged between the mesquite-dotted sandy banks of the Rio Grande to the sand beds of the Sabine on the east side of the state. Also in 1865, Philip Danforth Armour opened a meat packing plant in Chicago. Chicago's Union Stockyards opened on Christmas Day of that same year and promptly announced that they would pay $40 a head for cattle. In 1867, Joseph G. McCoy, who was from Illinois and knew about Union Stockyards' offer, heard about all those cattle in Texas, and he began to examine how he could send those Texas cattle to the Chicago market on the railroads. The closest the railroads had come to Texas was Kansas, and Kansas had passed legislation to keep the Longhorns out of the state. They were trying to control what was called Texas fever. Longhorns were immune to the disease, but they were carriers, and the Midwestern cattle were not immune. But then in 1867, Kansas eased the law by allowing the Longhorns to enter the state as long as they were west of a certain point, which was west of the cities located in eastern Kansas. McCoy took advantage of the new law and selected Abilene as his shipping point. In just a moment, we'll return with more of the story of Colonel McCoy and his stockyards in Abilene. For quite some time, you've heard me talk about Railhead Realty, and we've shown you some exciting ranches for sale in North Texas. Well, let me introduce you to Jim Martin and his business partner, Ron Hughes. Their professional staff is eager to show you beautiful homes, hundreds of exclusively listed home sites, and unbelievable commercial and retail opportunities in Parker County, Texas. Fort Worth is rapidly moving our way, and we're ready.
We have access to sporting activities like golf and water sports. We're close to professional sport facilities, and Parker County is the cutting horse capital of the world. Our schools are some of the most highly accredited in the state. Make Parker County your home and your business location. Give Jim and Ron a call or look them up on their website, railheadrealty.com. Their phone number is 817-441-2255. Parker County is one of the greatest places in the state of Texas to worship, work, and play. Come live with us. We're ready to welcome you to our community.
My body is truly powerful.
I have the power to lower my A1C.
Because my body can still make its own insulin.
And Trulicity activates my body to release it,
lowering my blood sugar from the first dose. Once weekly Trulicity responds when my body needs it 24/7. Trulicity is for type 2 diabetes. It's not insulin.
It isn't for people with type 1 diabetes. Don't take Trulicity if you're allergic to it. You or your family have medullary thyroid cancer or have multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2. Stop Trulicity and call your doctor right away if you have an allergic reaction, a lump or swelling in your neck, severe stomach pain, changes in vision, or diabetic retinopathy. Serious side effects may include pancreatitis. Taking Trulicity with sulfonylurea or insulin raises low blood sugar risk. Side effects include indigestion, fatigue, belly pain, decreased appetite, nausea, diarrhea, and vomiting, which can lead to dehydration and may worsen kidney problems.
I have it within me to lower my A1C.
Ask your doctor about Trulicity.
McCoy purchased 250 acres of land north and east of Abilene, on which he built a hotel he called the Drover's Cottage. He also built a stockyard that was equipped for 2,000 head of cattle, and he made sure it had railroad loading facilities. The Kansas Pacific Railway put in a switch that enabled the cattle carts to be loaded. And next, McCoy built an office and a bank, and then in order to encourage Texas cattle owners to drive their cattle to market in Abilene, he advertised extensively throughout the state, sending handbills to Texas towns and advertisements to newspapers. Longhorns in Texas were worth about $2 a head. McCoy offered up to 10 times that amount. And as I mentioned a while ago, the first herd that came directly from Texas to Abilene was owned by Colonel O.W. Wheeler and two partners. Wheeler went to San Antonio and with his partners purchased 2,400 Longhorn steers and 100 cow ponies. They hired 54 cowboys, arming them with Colt revolvers and Henry repeating rifles in case of Indian attacks. Wheeler and his cowboys in the beginning drove their herd along the old Shawnee Trail, which went into Missouri, but they left it when it swung east towards Dallas. They continued on past Fort Worth and crossed the Red River into Indian Territory, where they found Jesse Chisholm's wagon tracks and followed them. In Abilene, they shipped their cattle to Chicago from McCoy's pens. Dan Wagner of the Wagner Ranch also sent a herd up the trail in 1867, and other herds headed up the same route from Jacksboro. By the end of the first season, 35,000 head of cattle had been shipped to market from Abilene. In the beginning, the route was referred to as the Trail, or the Kansas Trail, or the Abilene Trail, or McCoy's Trail, and then it gradually became Chisholm's Trail, and finally the Chisholm Trail. Though the name originally applied only to the trail north of the Red River, Texas cowmen soon gave Chisholm's name to the entire trail, from the Rio Grande to central Kansas. The earliest known references to the Chisholm Trail in print were in the Kansas Daily Commonwealth of May 27th and October the 11th, 1870. On April 28, 1874, the Denison, Texas Daily News mentioned cattle going up the famous Chisholm Trail. The herds followed the old Shawnee Trail away of San Antonio, Austin, and Waco, where the trail split. The Chisholm Trail continued on to Fort Worth and passed east of Decatur to the crossing at Red River Station, which is in Montague County, about 8 miles northwest of Nocona. Today, from Fort Worth to Newton, Kansas, U.S. Highway 81 pretty well follows the Chisholm Trail. In Texas, cattle were always sold by class rather than by weight, and all animals of the same class brought the same price regardless of size or condition. But at the railheads, buyers bought steers for shipping to market by the pound. The Texas cowman quickly recognized the opportunity to increase their profits by getting their steers to market as fat as possible. And after the Chisholm Trail was opened and traveled by dozens of herds, trail bosses became proficient in handling large numbers of cattle with few men. Expert trail bosses found that with 10 or 12 riders and a cook, they could manage a herd of 2,500 head, which is the optimum size for successful trailing. The cattle did not follow a clearly defined trail except at river crossings. When dozens of herds were moving north, it was necessary to spread them out to find grass. The animals were allowed to graze along for 10 or 12 miles a day. Under an experienced boss and favorable conditions, the steers gained weight along the way. Most of the men who took part in the early drives knew little about what to expect north of the Red River. For trail bosses and cowboys alike, the only place to learn trailing techniques was on the trail. A man who planned to put together a herd in the spring began his preparations in the fall by visiting ranches and arranging with each for the delivery of a certain number of beeves to a fenced pasture at a specified date. According to Don Wooster, in his book, The Chisholm Trail, High Road of the Cattle Kingdom, nearly all the cowboys were in their teens or early 20s when they first went up the trail. Only cooks and bosses were likely to be over 30. Perhaps 1/5 were black cowboys or Mexican vaqueros, and about 1/3 made the trip more than once. When the herd had been gathered, the trail crew spent the next few days putting a road brand on them to identify any that might stray. When all was ready, they shaped up the herd, opened the pasture gate, and headed north, accompanied at first by extra hands. For several days, they pushed the cattle fairly hard to get them away from their customary ranges and to make them too tired to run at night. By the time a herd reached Indian territory, its travel was usually routine and the cattle moved along by habit. The strongest steers had taken their place as leaders, while others had positioned themselves somewhere in the long column. They took approximately the same place each day. Don't go anywhere. We're still on the trail. Abilene is not even in sight yet. We'll be right back. The working lands of Texas not only produce beef and the crops that sustain us, but these lands are also home to white-tailed deer and bobwhite quail, to alligators and ocelots, and support the greatest bird migrations in North America. Caesar Cleburne nurtured a love of horses, cattle, and wildlife during his 46 years on the King Ranch. To continue his legacy, the Caesar Cleburne Wildlife Research Institute was established with a mission to provide the knowledge necessary for everyone who cares about the outdoors to manage wildlife and wild places. Hi friends, I've been a member of the American Quarter Horse Association for a long time. And I can tell you firsthand all about the programs and services that AQHA provides to our industry. Use this code when you join AQHA or renew your membership so that the good folks at AQHA will know that I sent you. Enter it when completing your membership online. If you call in, please give that code to your customer representative. Join me in being a proud member of AQHA.
Experience the accomplishments, the energy, the passion for agriculture shown by the young people of rural America on FFA Today. It's an up-close and personal look at the activities of this life-changing organization. FFA members review the latest ag technology, promote the human touch behind their service efforts, log in to social media news, and share original videos from chapters across the country. Join us for FFA Today, Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central, and Sundays at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, 2:30 Central on RFD TV.
Watch the Cowboy Channel anytime, anywhere with PRCA on the Cowboy Channel Plus. Watch PRCA rodeos for only $9.99 a month. Visit CowboyChannelPlus.com to sign up and start streaming today.
A typical day began with the last change of guards before breakfast at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Those headed for their blankets for half an hour more of sleep awakened the cook, who stirred up his fire and started breakfast. The rattle of pots and pans told the wrangler it was time to ride out and look for the remuda. When breakfast was nearly ready, the boss and the men riding point or up front of the herd arose so they could eat and be with the herd when it drifted from the bed ground. The cook called the men, who arose and put their boots and hats on and rolled and tied up their bedrolls and threw them beside the wagon. By the time the men had finished breakfast, the wrangler was ready to push the horses into the rope corral. Each man's horse was roped out of the remuda, saddled, and the cowboys headed for the herd. At noon, the boss signaled the men to push the herd off the trail so the cattle could graze, and half the men headed for the wagon. They ate quickly, saddled fresh horses from the remuda, and loped back to the herd, allowing the other half of the men to eat. At supper time, the riders again came in shifts to eat. When the herd was bedded down for the night about 9 o'clock, all but the first guard headed for the wagon. The men then took turns night herding throughout the night, 2 hours at a time. Next in rank and pay to the trail boss was the cook, who historically had the reputation of being cranky all the time. But that's hardly surprising, as the cook had to feed 11 or 12 hard-working men 3 times a day, regardless of the weather. When the chuck wagons left the ranch headquarters for the trail, they were loaded with all the non-perishable items the cook would need to feed the cowboys for the next several months. And among those items on the list were beans, which were a staple at just about every meal. But also the cook made sure he had plenty of flour, brown sugar, cornmeal, some dried fruit, bacon or sow belly, and of course various spices. And there was one other thing that was always at the top of the list. That was coffee. The chuck wagon cook's old black coffee pot hung over the coals from way before daylight in the morning until way after sundown in the evening. And according to Ramon Adams in his book, Come and Get It, The Story of the Old Cowboy Cook, a 3 to 5 gallon pot was considered the standard size for a cow outfit of 10 or 12 men. He said that the old-time cowboys regarded coffee as essential at every meal, and added that when the cowboys could get it between meals, it contributed to their contentment with life. When cattle were held under herd at night, the hands were on guard duty demanded that coffee be ready at all times. Men going on guard needed a cup of coffee to keep them awake, while those being relieved needed a cup when they rode back into camp so as to warm them up before they crawled into their bedrolls. Sourdough biscuits baked in a Dutch oven were daily fare that men were always ready to eat. The dough was also used to make crusts for other dishes and desserts. Crossing rivers was another test of skill, especially the Red River, which during a particularly rainy period could be up to a mile wide. Storms upstream often made it rise suddenly, even while a herd was crossing. More trail hands were drowned in the Red than any other river. When the river was on the rise, the trail boss would have to hold his herd for as many days as it took for the river to go down, hoping there was enough grass left from the previous herds that had passed so his cattle could graze. On the Chisholm Trail, the crossing was made at the small community of Red River Station, which was the last place to buy supplies before reaching Abilene, Kansas. An abrupt bend in the river checked its flow at this point, creating a natural crossing which had been used for years by buffalo and Indians. Even so, the water was wide, swift, and sometimes clogged with sandbars. According to the historical marker at Red River Station, frequently cattle were so jammed, cowboys could walk across their backs. The citizens of Red River Station had built a ferry across the river so they could go back and forth, and that's probably how the trail bosses got their chuck wagons across. And once the herd reached the end of the trail and the hands were paid and allowed to go into town, they were more eager to catch up on entertainment than on sleep. First they visited a barber shop and had their shaggy manes trimmed. Then they bought a new outfit of clothing from the skin out, bathed, dressed, and headed for the nearest saloon, dance hall, or gambling house. The Chisholm Trail lasted only through 1884. It was closed by an 1885 Kansas quarantine law. During the 17 years of its existence, more than 5 million cattle were trailed out of Texas to Kansas markets. Jesse Chisholm in 1974 was inducted into the Hall of Great Westerners at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City. It's too bad he never knew just how famous he would become. You folks stay with us. We'll be right back.
For nearly 50 years, Jerry's Pre-Owned has been your complete source of used cars.
And when you shop at Jerry's Pre-Owned, you'll choose from over 700 quality pre-owns of every make and model.
All can be found at jerrystexas.com.
And they're all priced at Jerry's lowest price possible.
And best of all, they're all backed by the Jerry Durant name.
You can't put a price on that.
So come out our way and trade your way.
At Jerry's Pre-Owned in Weatherford.
Hi, my name's Keith Mundy, and I'm the president here at American Hat Company. When I came to work for Keith and Susan Maddox, the owners of American Hat Company, they gave me one goal, and that was to make the finest cowboy hat in the world. We have our bodies specifically blended to American hat specifications, and every step of the way the hat is touched by human hands. Here at American Hat Company, we are proud to be an American, and we're proud to wear an American hat.
Well, as you folks know by now, this is my favorite part of our show, where we pause to give thanks to the one who made all of this possible. Our song of inspiration is brought to you by our friends at the American Quarter Horse Association, registering America's favorite horse for over 75 years. The boys are on the porch of the bunkhouse. They're just waiting on us. What do you say we join them?
We gathered up a herd of longhorns bound for Abilene. A peddler came out to the camp.